Welcome to Layer the Alchemist, where we discuss all things heavy metal and hard rock. On today's episode, my early thoughts, first impressions of the new Priest songs. Alright, so one of my first impressions is that I don't like the name. It's even hard for me to sort of say it. KK's Priest. It just feels awkward. I sort of get why he's doing it. It feels like KK is trying to say that, you know, he's part of Priest. He was a big part of Priest. He has the right to use a part of the name or something. I'm not sure, but however it stands, it's awkward. It doesn't flow off the tongue. I just don't like it. He could have picked something that maybe referenced one of the earlier albums. Could have called the band The Sentinel or Nightcrawler, or even called the band Painkiller or whatever. It's something that would have been a strong Priest reference. But KK's Priest I don't like it. It feels awkward. For those that may not know, KK Downing was the guitar player, second guitar player with Glenn Tipton, up till his last album he did with Priest was Nostradamus, which I believe was 2008. So there's been two albums since then with Richie Faulkner on guitar in place of KK. KK, Glenn Tipton was always a little bit more of the lead player in Priest, although KK did play a number of leads. KK's style was always a little bit more to me like kind of the crazy whammy bar stuff and everything. And I always liked it. I thought he was a perfect complement to Glenn Tipton, who, had more of the melodic style and everything. KK was a little bit more of the crazy style. So they've released 4 singles from the album so far. I did a review of the 2 Iron Maiden singles for their upcoming album, so I thought, you know what, let's do KK's Priest. I'm a huge Judas Priest fan. They're one of my big bands, so of course I'm interested in this, and, I'm excited for it. It originally was going to feature Les Binks on drums. I remember back with the early press releases, and Les Binks played drums on Stained Class. He was on the Unleashed in the East live album and Hellbent for Leather. Love Les Binks playing. If you had to make me pick a favorite Judas Priest drummer, it would probably be Les Binks. So when I heard that he was involved, I thought, wow, this could be really interesting. He also has RIpper Owens on vocals. Now, RIpper, of course, was in Judas Priest for 2 albums, Jugulator and Demolition. RIpper has a very Rob Halford-like voice. In fact, the story goes that RIpper was in a Judas Priest cover band. I don't know how accurate that is, but he definitely has a very Rob Halford-like voice. So there's all kinds of, Priest connections here. Now, Les Binks did not record with the band, and that was a little disappointing. So when I heard that Les Binks was involved, I thought, wow, maybe this is going to be kind of like, maybe they're going to go back and give it like a 70s Priest feel, like a Stained Class or, Hellbent for Leather, like that era, Unleashed in the East era of the band. So Les isn't in the group anymore, and the other guys in the group we have AJ Mills on guitar, Tony Newton on bass, and I have to shout out to him because the bass playing on these songs is really, really great. He's sort of moving all over, adding all these really interesting bass parts. The sound of these. All right, let's say also Sean Elg is the drummer then in place of Les Binks. So the direction that they've gone in is a more Painkiller, maybe Ram It Down, Defenders of the Faith era Judas Priest. That's the sound that they're going for. Okay, so back to Tony Newton. Really great bass playing, and this has a very, very, sometimes when people do solo albums, they want to show how they can be different from the band that they're in. This is not the case with this. This is basically KK Downing making a Judas Priest record without the other guys in Judas Priest. So it's very much very, very Priest sounding. You throw Ripper's vocals into it, which are very Rob Halford-like, and of course, you know, it makes it sound even more like a Judas Priest album. But Tony Newton's bass playing is just great, man. He's all over these songs, and it really makes me think like Ian Hill, who, you know, in the 70s, Ian Hill had some, you know, he was a straightforward bass player, but he had some interesting little bass lines, and his bass was a lot more present in the mix in the 70s. Well, when the 80s hit, they must have, Ian or the band made a decision that, all right, the bass is just going to play super simple. It got a little buried in the mix through the 80s, and you don't really notice the bass in Judas Priest that much really from the 80s on. I mean, I'm a bass player. I remember reading a review of, I don't know, one of the last so many Priest records, and the reviewer sort of went down and said, you know, Rob adds this, Glenn Tipton adds this, and he goes, and Ian Hill does whatever it is that he does that keeps him in the band. And that's kind of it. He doesn't really, in my opinion, add a lot from the 80s on to the sound of the band. So it's real interesting to hear Tony Newton with this way more adventurous, busy bass playing, great bass sound that sort of jumps out of the mix, because it really makes you think like, wow, this is like Judas Priest with a really active, you know, all over the fretboard, moving around kind of bass player. I think the first song that they put out was Hellfire Thunderbolt, which is pretty cool. It's a fast kind of Painkiller style track. Again, you're going to hear me mention that a few times with these songs. It reminds me a little bit of like maybe Hell Patrol or All Guns Blazing. You know, it has that kind of fast driving Priest thing, really tight. The drums are really tight. The mix sounds really good. You can hear all the instruments. Everything's in check. And it has a very kind of Painkiller-ish mix with more bass, more natural sounding bass to it. I believe the next single was Sermon of the Sinners. They've released 4 singles up to this point. This is probably my favorite song out of the 4. It has this choir-like intro to it that I think is really cool. Ripper's vocals, it is very the song Painkiller-like, and Ripper is singing it very in that range that Rob sang Painkiller in, you know, that upper sort of screechy range that Rob does. And you know, it's cool. Maybe it's a little, sometimes it's, you know, Ripper has an amazing voice, but at times it sounds so much like Rob that it's a little bit distracting, but it's still cool. The song has a super driving feel to it. I love the middle section. It has this cool kind of halftime thing where it drops down into like half speed and the bass has all these runs, so that's really cool. Brothers on the Road. This is a more straightforward melodic rocker, maybe like something you would hear from Screaming for Vengeance, or even maybe Turbo or Ram It Down, a little bit more from that era. I don't really care for the lyrics in the song. It's like, here's the chorus of the song. We're brothers of the road and we rock. We're burning up the freeway, we never stop. Yeah. It just, man, it just seems real, I don't know, real stock, real, I don't know, it just, I don't care for those lyrics. I have this pet peeve that I don't like when people sing about metal or sing about rock. I don't know what it is. It's just a weird thing, you know, it very rarely works for me unless it's in like a context of like Dio, we rock. You know, it's like, I don't know, it just, so these lyrics sort of drag it down for me. It's a little bit mid-tempo. It's a little bit kind of stock standard feeling, a little bit forgettable for me. So it made me worry a little bit, but I guess it's a change from the first 2 singles, Hellfire Thunderbolt and Sermon of the Sinners, which are much more upbeat. All right, and then I think this is the most recent one, Raise Your Fists. This is an anthemic number. It's pretty catchy. It's got a pretty catchy chorus. Again, this is a little bit generic. I don't like the song title. Reminds me of something like from maybe Ram It Down, where there's a lot of lyrics I don't like on Ram It Down. That, you know, that album, the lyrics really took a step back for me, and this has kind of a little bit of that feel for me, so a little bit forgettable. So my initial reactions to KK Priest, it's a little mixed here. I like Hellfire Thunderbolt, Sermon of the Sinners. The other ones are okay. Brothers of the Road, Raise Your Fist. I was looking at their website, and they make a reference to some of the other songs, and they talk about it as sort of a long epic length number called, I believe it's The Return of the Sentinel, like part 2 of the Sentinel. So that sounds interesting. I'm a little bit worried that, and I get it. I mean, KK was in Priest from the beginning, so he has just as much, I guess, a stake, and he was involved in the writing of, you know, all their songs, I believe. So I guess he has a, you know, or any right as much as anybody else to make a Priest-like sounding record. But I just hope it isn't too much trying to sound like Judas Priest. You know, I remember when Rob Halford was doing the Halford band, and you know, he put out some albums that were very traditional metal, like they were very Priest like. Of course it's going to sound like Priest because Rob's there, but it had its own identity, and I hope that this, you know, doesn't lose, that they carve out their own, a little bit of their own sound, their own identity. It can still be Judas Priest because, hey, KK Downing's here, RIpper Owens is here, he was on 2 Priest records, but I hope that they carve out their own sound and their own identity. I have to be honest, I'm a little bit nervous. I'm gonna buy it when it comes out because I'm a huge Priest fan, and you know, I love this kind of, you know, classic sounding metal type stuff. But so we got to wait to see. I know that the release of this has been delayed a few times. I think it's supposed to come out now in October, so we'll see. All right, so let me know out there, have you guys heard any of the new KK's Priest songs? I do not like this band name, and it's almost hard to say. Have you guys heard any of these songs? What do you think of them? Are you okay with it sounding this much like Judas Priest and the Painkiller era Judas Priest? Or, you know, what are your thoughts on all that? Let me know what you guys think down in the comments down below. And until we see you again, make sure you stay heavy, stay metal.